Why was everyone laughing at her? That was the first question echoing across the firing range. The morning sun hung low over Fort Benning, pouring gold across the long stretch of dirt and concrete. Soldiers gathered in clusters, trading easy banter, voices rising above the metallic clang of rifles being checked and rechecked. Some wore their uniforms like armor, chests decorated with badges that caught the light. Others, recruits barely out of civilian life, shifted nervously, their soft faces betraying inexperience. But no one's eyes were on them. They were on the small woman at lane 15. Sarah Wilson. 5'3" at most, her uniform looked borrowed, a set of maintenance coveralls with frayed edges, dust ground into the knees, oil stains on the sleeves. She didn't belong here, not on this stage, not in front of 200 pairs of eyes. And yet she stood at her lane, methodically setting out her rifle. It looked like junk. The stock was patched with duct tape, the handguard cracked. Rust spots bit into the barrel. It looked like something left in a corner of the armory, pulled out of a scrap heap because no one else would touch it. Even in a museum it would have drawn laughter. "Get that piece of trash off my range." The voice carried across the bleachers, hard and sharp. Captain James Reynolds, commander of the Rangers, tall, broad, shoulders filling the doorway when he moved, his presence sucking the air from the crowd. He stepped closer, looming over her like a predator toying with prey. His tone wasn't just loud, it was calculated, pitched to carry, pitched to make her small. "This is a professional competition," he barked, eyes narrowing. "Not a charity event for clerks who think they can play soldier." The crowd laughed, eagerly, nervously, because that's what you did when a commander threw bait. You laughed, even if the punchline wasn't funny. Only one man didn't. Master Sergeant Michael Harrison. He stood on the range platform, scanning the scene with eyes that had seen 30 years of combat, the kind of gaze that missed nothing. While the others laughed at the trembling hands arranging a broken rifle, Harrison's focus tightened. Those hands trembled, yes, but the way she held the rifle, the way her feet planted unconsciously, the way her breathing slowed between movements, that wasn't clumsy. That was something else. Sarah said nothing. She didn't rise to the mockery, didn't snap back. She just adjusted her grip, quiet, precise, almost as though she wasn't hearing Reynolds at all, almost as though she was somewhere else. And Harrison felt a ripple in his gut, a memory, unwelcome and sharp. Fallujah 2004. Pinned down, his unit bleeding out in an alley when 6 operators appeared, shadows moving like they'd been born in the dark. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. Every shot they fired was an execution. Every movement was perfect. And then they vanished, leaving Harrison's team alive, confused, shaken. The only mark they'd left behind, a shadow of an eagle inked across one shoulder, glimpsed in the stutter of muzzle flashes. He'd hunted for answers for years. He'd found whispers, a name, shadow team, ghost soldiers who didn't officially exist. And now, as he watched Sarah Wilson set out her battered rifle, he felt something stir. His phone buzzed, an encrypted channel long silent. A message. "Harrison, you seeing what I'm seeing? Lane 15. Confirm or deny." Signed William Cassidy, former Task Force 88, now buried deep in the Pentagon, higher clearance than most generals. Harrison typed one word. Observing. The game had just changed. Below, Colonel Robert Matthews approached the platform, his presence quiet but heavy. An intelligence officer by trade, rarely seen at competitions. He joined Harrison without a smile. "Beautiful morning for shooting," he said. "You didn't come here for that," Harrison replied. Matthews's eyes followed his, to lane 15. "That our maintenance clerk?" "Yes, sir." "Transferred here 3 months ago." "Yes, sir." Matthews pulled out his secure tablet. With a swipe, Sarah Wilson's personnel file appeared, if you could call it that. Redactions bled across the screen, thick black lines where history should have been. Years erased. Assignments missing. Service time that didn't fit her rank. Not much of a record for a clerk, Matthews muttered. Harrison's gaze never left her. Not much of a clerk either. Downrange, Sarah loaded ammunition with painstaking care. She didn't toss the rounds into a magazine. She examined each one, weighing it, inspecting it, as though she'd seen bad rounds cost lives, as though she remembered. From the bleachers, Reynolds's second-in-command filmed her with her phone, laughing, narrating. "Okay, family, check this out. Some desk jockey with a duct-taped rifle thinks she's gonna outshoot Rangers. This'll be comedy gold." The crowd leaned in for the show. But Harrison noticed something none of them saw. A glint at her wrist, a brace, carbon fiber embedded with micro-servos. Not the kind you bought at a drugstore. Military-issue medical command only, developed for combat surgeons who needed hands steady under fire. Price tag, more than a clerk made in a year. Authorization, restricted. Harrison's pulse quickened. This wasn't chance. This wasn't random. Sarah Wilson had walked into this competition for a reason. But what? And why now? The briefing ended. The range was declared hot. Targets were ready. The Rangers lifted their rifles with practiced ease, firing quick, precise groups. Shots cracked downrange, their clusters neat and tight. This was what they trained for, what they prided themselves on. Sarah didn't fire. She lay still, too still. 30 seconds ticked by. Whispers spread through the crowd. Frozen. Scared. Doesn't belong here. Harrison knew better. He'd seen this before. The patience of elite snipers, the silence before the first shot. At 45 seconds, Sarah squeezed the trigger. The electronic scoreboard blinked. 10 ring, dead center. Gasps, a ripple of disbelief. Laughter faltered. One shot could be luck. She fired again. Another perfect hit, nearly on top of the first. 2 shots, same hole. The Rangers frowned, adjusted scopes, muttered excuses. Wind must have shifted. She's riding luck. 3rd shot, perfect. 4th, perfect. By the 5th, the hole in the target had widened, but only because her shots were layering in the same place. And the laughter stopped. The bleachers went silent except for the echo of gunfire. Eyes widened, mouths shut. Soldiers leaned forward, no longer watching the scoreboard but the trembling hands on the broken rifle. Harrison's binoculars locked onto her. He saw the timing. She fired in rhythm with her heartbeat, using the tremor, not fighting it. Each pause in the shake became her window. Each flaw became her weapon. 10 shots, 10 perfect hits. Time, 1 minute 47 seconds. With a rifle that shouldn't have been able to hit a barn wall. With hands that looked too weak to hold steady. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Reynolds broke it, voice cracking as he shouted, "Scoring error, has to be. That rifle's junk. This isn't possible." But Harrison had already checked. The system was flawless. High-speed footage captured every round, every path. Unquestionable. She cheated, one of Reynolds's men spat. How? Harrison countered. Every shot was recorded. There was no answer, just fear hiding behind anger. Sarah saved her rifle, movements calm, detached, not proud, not triumphant, just finished. The crowd stared at her like they were seeing a ghost. And maybe they were. Because Sarah Wilson wasn't supposed to exist. Not like this. Not here. And yet she stood, trembling hands steady enough to silence an entire range. How could trembling hands reload faster than steady ones? That was the question no one wanted to say out loud. The second round was about to begin. 30 rounds, 30 seconds, targets at 50, 100, 150 meters. Magazine changes required. It was brutal even for Rangers. Precision under speed separated the disciplined from the reckless. The Rangers whispered to each other with forced confidence. Precision was luck. Let's see her do it under pressure. She'll fold. Reynolds had his swagger back. He leaned against the bench near her lane, looming close. His voice was low but loud enough for the crowd to hear. Nice trick shots, maintenance, but rapid fire. This is where real soldiers earn their place. This isn't patience. This is war. Sarah didn't look up. She was checking her magazines, slowly, deliberately, fingers moving in a sequence only veterans recognized. She wasn't just looking for dents or scratches. She checked the feed lips for burrs. She tested spring tension. She ordered them in a way that meant something to her. Not random, not clumsy. Ritual. The crowd saw shaking hands. Harrison saw something else. The rhythm of thousands of repetitions. The economy of someone who knew every second mattered. His phone buzzed again. Cassidy. Shadow confirmed. Alert base commander, special personnel en route. Do not interfere. Harrison exhaled. This wasn't just a soldier with surprising skill. This was history colliding with the present. And if Cassidy was right, the ripples would reach Washington before the brass here could blink. He stole a glance toward Colonel Matthews. The man's jaw was tight, his eyes locked on Sarah. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. Both knew something was unraveling. Shooters ready, Harrison's voice carried across the range. The crowd hushed, the system beeped, targets began their dance. The Rangers opened fire in bursts. 2 shots, reacquire 2 shots, methodical, professional. Sarah's rifle cracked differently. Not pairs, not patterns the others used. A flow, shots weaving into one another. Her tremor, once so glaring, became part of her rhythm. The stutter of her hands meshed with the recoil, sinking into something almost musical. 10 shots, a blur of movement, her magazine dropped. The next slid in. Smooth, too smooth, quicker than eyes could follow. She didn't fumble, didn't hesitate. The muscle memory was deeper than her nerves could shake. The Rangers took 2 seconds to reload. Sarah took less than 1. The empty mag hadn't hit the ground before she was firing again. The crowd began leaning forward, phones lowered, conversation stopped. 50-meter targets, headshots. 100-meter, center mass. 150, a grim triangle, pelvis, chest, head, kill shots, not just marksmanship, training meant for combat, not competition. By her 20th round, even Reynolds had stopped firing. His jaw clenched as he watched her work. He knew what those patterns meant. Everyone with combat experience did. This wasn't someone playing soldier. This was a soldier who'd lived in war. She finished with 3 seconds left. 30 shots, 30 hits, each placed with the kind of precision that didn't just drop a target, it ended a fight. Silence. The scoreboard didn't just show a perfect score. It showed surgical placement, a level of accuracy the system itself had trouble processing. Someone whispered, "Impossible." But the crowd knew better now. Sarah lowered her rifle, saved it, sat back on her heels. No celebration, no smile, just a calm breath as though the world had stopped noticing her, and that was the way she preferred it. Reynolds tried. "Lucky again," he muttered, forcing a laugh. But the laugh died in his throat, because he knew, everyone knew, this wasn't luck. From the edge of the range, 3 black SUVs rolled into the lot. Civilian plates, men and women stepping out, plain clothes but unmistakable. They carried themselves like weapons, operators, even without uniforms. Harrison's pulse quickened when he recognized one. General William Parker, Task Force 88, a man who didn't leave Washington unless the stakes were national. And Parker wasn't watching Reynolds. He wasn't watching the Rangers. His eyes locked onto Sarah Wilson, and for a fleeting second before he masked it, Harrison saw grief. Raw, unfiltered grief. The break between rounds arrived, but no one moved like they normally did. No easy chatter, no trash talk, just uneasy silence. Sarah sat on a bench drinking water, her rifle across her lap, trembling hands visible, alone. Only one soldier approached, Private Alina Vasquez, young, fresh out of basic. She handed Sarah a jacket against the morning chill, a simple gesture, quiet, respectful. Sarah accepted it with a nod. Their eyes met, wordless understanding passing between them. The crowd noticed. So did Reynolds's men, and it stung them more than her perfect shooting had, because she didn't need their approval. She already had something more powerful, respect freely given. From across the range, Captain Sullivan of the JAG Corps scribbled notes. His attention wasn't on Sarah's shots but on the Rangers clustered uneasily together. Particularly Chen and Brooks, two soldiers who had laughed the loudest earlier, two who now looked pale, nervous. Matthews's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then at Parker. A nod passed between them. Harrison's gut tightened. Something bigger than competition was unfolding. And Sarah Wilson, maintenance clerk, trembling hands, duct-taped rifle, was the center of it. He leaned against the platform rail, eyes narrowing as Sarah stood for the next round. She wasn't watching the targets. She was scanning the crowd, cataloging faces, tracking exits, moving like someone who'd learned never to trust safety. And Harrison thought of Cassidy's message. Shadow confirmed. But confirmed what? Why wasn't she aiming at the target? That was the question that froze the bleachers. The third round was different. No still silhouettes waiting patiently. This was movement, unpredictability, targets sliding on rails, popping out from barriers, darting across the lanes like ghosts. It was meant to simulate combat, chaos, speed, threat. Soldiers trained for years to master this sequence. Even veterans struggled. The Rangers prepped with cocky assurance. This was their world, moving targets, speed, aggression. They'd reclaim their pride here. Sarah stepped to the line, rifle in hand, trembling hands, duct-tape stock, cracked handguard. No one expected anything, not really. But everyone watched. Moving target sequence begin, Harrison called out. The mechanical hum filled the air as the system whirred to life. First target 75 meters, walking pace left to right. The Rangers opened fire immediately, rifles barking. Bullets tore paper. Dozens of hits scattered across center mass. Sarah's rifle stayed still. She wasn't tracking the target. She was aiming at empty space. And then crack. The target walked into her bullet, collapsed instantly. One shot, predictive. The bleachers fell silent. Even the Rangers hesitated. Second target, 150 meters faster this time. Sarah fired once, dead center. Two targets popped up together, different ranges, different speeds. She didn't pause. Two cracks, so close together they sounded like one. Both targets down. A ripple moved through the crowd. Phones lowered. Breath caught. Soldiers leaned forward, forgetting themselves. Sarah wasn't firing at targets. She was firing at inevitability, predicting motion, reading the machine, trusting instinct deeper than calculation. The Rangers' cadence faltered. Some stopped shooting altogether, staring across lanes at the woman they'd mocked just minutes ago. The targets came harder now, partially obscured behind barriers, angled, quick. The system pushed speed, testing reflex. The duct-taped rifle should have wavered. Her trembling hands should have failed. But every shot landed. Through barriers. Through gaps. Perfect. Harrison gripped the rail, his chest tight. It wasn't skill anymore. It wasn't training. It was art. He glanced at Matthews. The colonel stood rigid, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed it. Recognition. And then Harrison heard it, a whisper from somewhere in the bleachers. Shadow Eagle. The name moved like a chill through the crowd, hushed voices repeating it. A rumor, a legend, a ghost. The final target dropped. The scoreboard blinked. Perfect score. Time 37 seconds. Sarah lowered her rifle, saved it with calm precision. her face expressionless, her eyes unreadable. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was fear. "Final round," Harrison announced, though his voice was unsteady. "Drone targets." This was new. 5 quadcopters, agile, erratic, capable of speeds that made them nearly impossible to hit. The record was 3 drones in 45 seconds, set by a 2-man special operations team working together. Sarah would be alone. While Tex prepared the drones, the crowd buzzed with nervous energy. Not laughter now, not even whispers, just unease. Veterans trading glances, Rangers glowering in confusion. And in the back, Parker stood still as stone, his presence weighing down the air. Reynolds couldn't hold it in. He marched toward her, jaw tight, pride bleeding into desperation. "This isn't a joke anymore," he hissed. "That rifle of yours, it's dangerous. I could file a safety complaint. Shut this down." Sarah looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were calm. "Predatory." "You do what you think is best, Captain," she said softly. The words were polite, but beneath them something darker, a warning, a reminder that he was playing with fire. Reynolds stepped back, unsettled despite himself. Break time ticked on. The Rangers huddled, muttering to each other, some furious, some pale. Hayes clutched her phone but no longer filmed. Chen and Brooks avoided everyone's gaze. Vasquez, the private, sat quietly beside Sarah, as if standing near her now meant more than aligning with her own unit. And Sarah? She just checked her rifle, trembling hands steady as ever. Harrison's phone buzzed again. "Cassidy." "Ghost pattern confirmed. Do not interfere. Special personnel arriving now." Harrison's heart thudded. "Ghost pattern, shadow team." He glanced at Sarah again, at the quiet ritual of her preparation, at the calm face hiding storms no one else could see. This wasn't about a competition anymore. This was about ghosts. And ghosts, Harrison knew, always came with a cost. Why was she taking off her jacket? The question spread in nervous silence, thicker than the Georgia heat. The drone round had ended like the others, perfectly. 5 drones shattered from the sky in less than 40 seconds, each taken with a single shot. The range had gone dead quiet. Rangers avoided each other's eyes. Phones recorded in secret. The legend of a trembling-handed clerk had already escaped the fence line. That's when Reynolds snapped. The humiliation was too much. "This isn't marksmanship anymore," he barked, storming into the open, voice sharp with desperation. "This isn't combat. It's circus tricks with a broken toy." He pointed at her duct-taped rifle, spittle catching the sunlight. "You want to prove yourself. Do it without your crutch. Hand to hand, no hiding, no tricks." A murmur rippled through the bleachers. Some soldiers laughed nervously. Others frowned, uncomfortable. A few whispered warnings. They knew what hand-to-hand bouts could turn into. Sarah didn't answer. She set her rifle down with care, as though handing off a child. She unzipped her jacket, folding it neatly before setting it aside. The Georgia sun revealed the gray t-shirt beneath, clinging with sweat, outlining a frame leaner than most, smaller than all. Reynolds smirked. "This'll be quick." But then she rolled up her sleeve. Gasps cut through the crowd. There, inked into her shoulder, was the shadow of an eagle, wings spread wide, talons sharp. Not fresh, faded by years. The mark whispered about in fobs, in safe houses, in dark corners of the Pentagon. The mark soldiers swore they'd seen when ghosts had saved them in impossible firefights. The mark of Shadow Team. "Shadow Eagle," someone whispered again, this time louder. Phones snapped to attention. Veterans stiffened. Younger soldiers looked at one another in confusion. Reynolds froze for only a second, just a second. Then pride kicked back in. "Fake," he spat, forcing a sneer. "Anyone can get a tattoo." But his voice was weaker now. Sarah stepped into the circle. Bare hands, bare arms, trembling fingers curling into fists. She didn't posture. She didn't square her shoulders like a ranger, she just stood, balanced, relaxed. And Harrison knew. He'd seen it in alleys, in villages, in kill houses at 2 in the morning. The stance of someone who didn't need to look strong because they already were. "Fight," someone shouted, breaking the silence. Reynolds lunged first, big and fast, a shove meant to send her sprawling. Sarah didn't block, she pivoted. His weight carried past her, stumbling, gasps from the bleachers. He spun, angry now, swinging a heavy fist. Sarah ducked under, sliding close, her trembling hands locking his arm in a joint hold. She didn't break it. She didn't throw him. She just froze him in place. A warning, a show of restraint. Reynolds snarled, ripped free, came again with a knee strike meant to finish it. This time Sarah moved faster. Too fast. A pivot, a twist, and Reynolds was on the ground, gasping, his shoulder locked under pressure, his face buried in the dirt. The crowd erupted. Shouts, disbelief, curses, some cheered, some booed. But no one laughed. Sarah let go, stepped back, gave him room to rise. Reynolds staggered up, face flushed, pride bleeding into rage. "You," he began, but the words stuck. Because her sleeve had slipped higher in the fight, exposing more than the tattoo. Scars. Thick, pale, ragged lines. The kind that came from shrapnel, from blades, from battles no clerk ever saw. The bleachers went dead silent again. Sarah pulled her sleeve back down. Calm, controlled. But her eyes, for the first time, they betrayed something. Not anger, not pride. Fear. Not of Reynolds, not of the crowd. Of being seen. Harrison's chest tightened. He knew that fear. The fear of ghosts dragged into daylight. Matthew stepped forward, voice low, cutting through the tension. "That's enough." But it wasn't enough, not for Reynolds. His pride was broken, but his fury was. He pointed at Sarah, voice cracking. "She's not supposed to be here. She's not on record, not in the system. Who the hell is she?" Every eye turned back to Sarah, demanding, questioning. And she just stood there, silent, trembling hands hanging at her sides. Parker's voice broke the silence from the back, calm, heavy, unmistakable. "She's who you call when the world is already burning." Heads snapped toward him. General Parker didn't speak lightly, didn't appear in places like this without purpose. And now his eyes locked on Sarah with something none of the soldiers understood, but Harrison did. Recognition, loss, debt. The bleachers buzzed with whispers. Phones typed furiously. The legend was out. Shadow Team wasn't rumor anymore. And Sarah Wilson wasn't invisible. Not anymore. She picked up her jacket, slipping it back over her arms, covering the eagle, covering the scars. She lifted her rifle, quiet, steady. And she walked off the range, leaving silence in her wake. Why was she walking away so calmly? That's what gnawed at everyone's mind. The range was chaos now. Soldiers murmured, voices rising in urgent waves. Some spoke of tattoos and ghosts, others cursed under their breath. Phones buzzed, screens lit with frantic texts. A legend had just bled into daylight and no one knew what it meant. Reynolds stood off to the side, his pride cracked and his authority bleeding out. He barked at his rangers, ordering them back in line, but his voice carried no weight now. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. Sarah Wilson, trembling hands steady enough to shatter pride and silence crowds, walked off the range like nothing had happened. Jacket zipped, rifle slung, her pace slow, even, unshaken. But inside was war. She could feel it. The old weight pressing against her ribs, that suffocating pressure that never left. Every step away from the range was heavier than the last. She'd sworn to herself she'd stay hidden, that the world would never know her face again. She had vanished into maintenance duty, a ghost content to be forgotten. And now, exposed. Again. She reached the bench outside the equipment shed and sat, her trembling hands wrapped around her canteen. She didn't drink. She just needed something to hold, something to keep her here now before the memories dragged her back. Fallujah, Kandahar, 1,000 rooftops, 1,000 targets, the silence before every pull of the trigger, the faces she'd never let herself remember after. She squeezed the canteen harder, her hands shook more. Sarah. The voice pulled her back, heavy, steady. She didn't need to look to know who it was. General Parker. He stood before her now, close enough that his shadow covered hers. His presence was different from Reynolds's bluster. Parker didn't need volume. He carried the weight of too many graves in his tone. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. Sarah didn't answer. "You were pulled from the roster 6 years ago, ghosted, buried. No one was supposed to see you again." Her trembling hands curled tighter around the canteen. She wanted to say she hadn't meant for this, that she hadn't asked for it, that she'd come here for peace, not for ghosts, but the words wouldn't come. Matthews arrived, his shoes crunching over gravel. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He just held out his tablet, her redacted file glowing on the screen. "You're supposed to be dead," he said bluntly. Sarah finally lifted her eyes. They were steady, though her hands weren't. "Would have been easier if I was." The words cut sharper than any accusation. Matthews blinked, thrown off for just a second. Parker didn't flinch. He'd heard that tone before. He'd carried it himself. From the bleachers, soldiers strained to watch without being obvious. Whispers rose, rumors spreading like wildfire. Shadow Eagle. She's alive. She was one of them. Reynolds, red-faced and shaking, stormed toward the shed, but Harrison intercepted him halfway, a hand pressing firm against his chest. "Not now, Captain. She humiliated me." "She exposed you," Harrison corrected, voice like gravel. "There's a difference." Reynolds shoved past but stopped when he saw Parker's glare. The general didn't raise his voice, didn't move, but the message was clear: approach and you'll regret it. Reynolds clenched his fist, jaw tight, but stepped back, not by choice, by instinct. Inside, Sarah sat in silence, Parker and Matthews looming, Harrison watching from a distance. The air thickened with unspoken truths. Finally, Parker broke it. "You can't stay invisible anymore." Sarah's hands trembled harder. She lowered her gaze. "I never wanted to be visible in the first place." "You think legends get that choice?" Parker asked quietly. She laughed then, soft, bitter, the kind of laugh that cut. "Legends? You mean ghosts? That's all we were, disposable shadows, useful until the weight broke us, then buried." Her words hung heavy. Harrison felt them like shrapnel in his chest, because he knew she wasn't wrong. Parker shifted. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. Matthews finally spoke, his tone clipped. "There are people who will want you back on the roster. Command will see what you did out there today. They'll call it proof of readiness." Sarah's trembling hands stilled for a moment. She looked up, her eyes sharp now. "I'm not ready. I'll never be ready." The silence after that was brutal. From outside, Vasquez approached timidly, clutching something in her hands. Sarah's jacket. She left it on the bench during the fight. Vasquez held it like it was sacred, like handing it back was more honor than duty. Sarah took it gently. Their eyes met again, the same unspoken bond as before, respect, understanding. Vasquez whispered, "They don't understand what it cost you." Sarah said nothing, but her silence said everything. As Vasquez walked away, Reynolds muttered curses under his breath, his pride plotting revenge. The rangers around him avoided his gaze. Some looked ashamed, some looked afraid, but none looked at Sarah the way they had before. Because she wasn't a clerk anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was something worse. A reminder of what war really made of people. Why did she freeze when Parker said her name again? The crowd outside didn't notice, but Harrison did. Sarah sat on the bench, jacket folded in her lap, trembling hands clenched tight. Parker stood before her, Matthews to the side, both men waiting silent. They weren't asking for performance anymore. They were asking for history, for the truth she had buried 6 years ago. And Sarah knew there was no way out, not anymore. Parker's voice was low, steady, as if trying not to break glass. "They'll come for you, Sarah, command, agencies, maybe even enemies we thought we buried. They'll want to use you again, but before that I need to know, why did you walk away?" Her eyes lowered. She wanted to stay silent, wanted to keep her ghosts hers alone, but silence felt heavier now than words. So she spoke. "I was 19, the first time they dropped me in." The words came flat, almost clinical, but Harrison felt the weight behind them. Dust, heat, a village no one cared about, just coordinates on a screen. We weren't supposed to exist, so nothing we did existed either. They called it surgical, precise, clean, but it never was. Her hands shook harder. She pressed them into her knees as if pinning the tremor down. "I remember my first shot. A rooftop, 200 meters. I thought it would be hard. I thought I'd see a man maybe hesitate. But he stepped into the scope, and before I could even think, my finger pulled." She paused, swallowed, her voice cracked. "He didn't drop like I expected. He fell sideways, clutching at his chest. It wasn't clean, it wasn't quiet," he screamed, and his son was there. 12, maybe 13. He ran to him, held him. I watched it all through glass. Her throat tightened. She turned away, hiding her face from Parker and Matthews, from the crowd just beyond. That's what they don't tell you about being a ghost. You don't just disappear from the world. The world disappears inside you. Every sound, every scream, every last look. It never leaves. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even Reynolds, skulking at the edge of the crowd, didn't speak. Matthews shifted uncomfortably, as though her words scratched at something he didn't want to feel. Parker, though, he stood still, his jaw hard, his eyes carrying an ache that matched hers. She wasn't finished. Kandahar 2 years later. Ambush. We were cornered. The call came down to clear the block. My spotter hesitated. I didn't. I fired until my rifle was dry. Roofs, windows, alleys. When it was over, they told me I'd saved 20 Americans. But when I closed my eyes that night, all I saw were shadows dropping in dust, and I couldn't tell who they were anymore. Her voice cracked again, breaking at the edges. I started losing names, faces, even my own. By the time they rotated me out, I was Sarah anymore. I was just Shadow Eagle, and I hated her. Harrison's chest burned. He wanted to step forward, to say something, anything. But what words could make that weight lighter? Parker finally spoke, quiet, careful. "You walked away because you couldn't carry it anymore." Sarah shook her head. "No, I walked away because I realized I'd stopped seeing people at all. Everyone became shapes, targets, patterns. Even when I came home, I couldn't stop. In crowds, on streets. I knew who could reach me first, who would fall last. I didn't see neighbors or strangers. I saw threats, and I was ready to end them without a thought." She lifted her trembling hands then, showing them as if they were evidence. "That's what these are. Not nerves, not weakness. They're memories that won't let go. My body's shaking from everything I should have left buried." Her words hit harder than any shot. The bleachers outside had gone eerily quiet, soldiers straining to hear every syllable. The weight of war they'd never fought pressed against them now, bleeding from her voice. Matthews looked unsettled, his usual detachment cracking. "You were pulled from the roster for psych reasons, weren't you?" Sarah almost laughed, bitter, hollow. "No, they pulled me because I wouldn't stop volunteering. Every mission, every kill. I was good at it, too good. And one day I realized I wasn't asking who I was killing anymore, just if the shot was possible." Her eyes locked on Parker, then. "And that's when I knew. If I stayed, I'd lose whatever was left of me, so I walked, disappeared, let the world think I was gone, because maybe that way I could be human again." The words cracked open something deep in the air, a silence raw enough to hurt. Vasquez, listening from the crowd, pressed her fists to her chest, tears in her eyes. Harrison's throat burned. Even Reynolds shifted uneasily, his pride no shield against the truth he'd just heard. Parker exhaled slowly, his voice heavy. "You never stopped being human, Sarah. You just carried more than anyone ever should." She shook her head, eyes wet but defiant. "No, General, I carried what no one else would, and I broke. Don't make the mistake of calling that strength." Her voice fell to a whisper then, barely audible. "Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away." And for the first time, Parker looked away. Why were the phones going off all at once? The bleachers pulsed with the glow of screens, soldiers checking messages, whispering to each other. It wasn't just gossip anymore. News was spreading beyond the base. Somehow, in the space of minutes, the story had leaked. A clerk with a duct-taped rifle, the tattoo of Shadow Team, a legend alive when she was supposed to be dead. Parker's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. Washington would be calling, commanders would be circling, and Sarah Wilson's quiet exile was already over. Matthews's tablet buzzed. He checked, his face grim. Pentagon already flagged the footage. It's gone viral inside the net. Half the duty is whispering. They'll want her in a chair by tonight. Sarah sat still, jacket tight over her arms, trembling hands gripping her rifle. She hadn't spoken since the confession. Her silence was louder than all the phones. "They can't have her," Parker said flatly. Matthews looked up. "You don't get to decide that, Bill. None of us do." The second her face hit those screens, she stopped being Sarah Wilson. She became an asset again. The word cut deep. Asset, not person, not soldier, asset. Sarah flinched, her knuckles white around the rifle. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I knew this would happen. That's why I hid. That's why I stayed small." Her voice broke. But they never let ghosts rest. Harrison stepped closer then, his weathered voice breaking through the tension. "Let her speak for herself. Haven't you done enough deciding for her?" It was the first time anyone had spoken for her, instead of about her all day. Sarah lifted her eyes. They were red-rimmed, raw but steady. "I'm not going back. Not to war, not to command, not to being a shadow you can pull out when you're desperate. I already gave everything I had. What's left isn't yours to take." Matthews stiffened. "You don't get to just walk away. The people who know what you know, who can do what you do." "Don't get to be human," Sarah snapped, her voice cracking sharp. The crowd outside stilled at the bite in her tone. Parker sighed, rubbing his temple, his voice softened. "They'll hunt you if you refuse, Sarah. They'll paint you as unstable, dangerous, a liability. If they can't control you, they'll destroy you. That's how the system works. You know that." Sarah's trembling hands gripped tighter. She knew. God, she knew. That's why she'd vanished in the first place. Her voice fell quiet, brittle but certain. "Then I'd rather be destroyed as myself than survive as their ghost." The words hung heavy. The crowd beyond the shed shifted uneasily, soldiers exchanging glances. Some nodded, silently agreeing. Others looked afraid, as if the ground itself had tilted. Reynolds chose that moment to step forward, pride laced with venom. "She's dangerous. You all heard her. She's admitting she can't be controlled. This isn't a soldier. It's a weapon that doesn't know where to aim." But his words fell flat. For the first time, no one laughed with him. No one followed. Even his own rangers avoided his eyes. Some looked ashamed. Vasquez in particular stared at him with open disgust. Parker turned on him with a glare that froze him mid-breath. "Careful, Captain. You've mocked her enough. You're alive today because people like her bled in places you'd never last an hour. Show some respect." Reynolds swallowed hard, rage caged by rank, and backed away. Sarah closed her eyes then. Her body trembled harder, not from fear but from exhaustion, from the endless cycle of being dragged into light she never asked for. She whispered, voice barely audible, I can't do this again. Vasquez, young and untested, stepped forward. She spoke not like a subordinate, but like someone who saw the cracks others ignored. Ma'am, you don't have to, not like before. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Sarah looked at her, truly looked, and for a flicker of a second something shifted, the hardness eased, the tremor softened. But then Matthews's phone buzzed again. He cursed under his breath. Orders, they want her flown out tonight. Debrief. Evaluation, full control. Parker's voice dropped like a hammer. No. Matthew stared. Bill. No, Parker repeated, steel in his tone. She's not theirs anymore. She's not a number or a file or a tool. She gave more than anyone else could have, and she doesn't owe them another drop. Matthews froze, torn between duty and conscience. The silence stretched. Soldiers outside whispered, watching history bend. And in the middle of it all, Sarah sat trembling, caught between two futures she didn't want, hunted as a fugitive or chained as a ghost again. The weight pressed so hard she could barely breathe. And yet through the blur of fear and exhaustion a thought surfaced, quiet, steady. Maybe Vasquez was right. Maybe the only way forward wasn't silence. Maybe dignity didn't always mean hiding. Maybe it meant choosing how she would be remembered, not as a ghost, but as a human who refused to disappear. She lifted her head, her voice soft but clear. Then let them come. Let them try to own me again. They'll learn the same thing Reynolds learned today. Some things can't be controlled. Her words spread through the crowd like fire. Soldiers straightened. Some nodded. Even the veterans who knew the cost felt a flicker of pride. For the first time all day, Sarah didn't look like she was running. She looked like she was standing. Why wasn't anyone leaving? The competition was over. The range was cold. The targets had been pulled. And yet no one moved. 200 soldiers sat in the bleachers, silent, eyes fixed on the woman who had silenced them all. Not with a rifle, not with fists, with the weight of truth. Sarah Wilson stood near the equipment shed, jacket zipped to her chin, trembling hands folded over her rifle. Her body screamed exhaustion. Her eyes carried storms. And yet somehow she stood taller now than when the day began. Reynolds had retreated into the corner, surrounded by his rangers, but alone all the same. His voice, once sharp and commanding, was gone. Every time he opened his mouth, silence answered. Authority doesn't return once respect is lost. Parker remained by Sarah's side, a silent wall of protection. Matthews paced nearby, his tablet buzzing with orders he no longer knew how to follow. Harrison leaned against the rail, arms crossed, gaze steady, as though guarding something more fragile than pride. And Vasquez stood closest of all, eyes shining, her young frame brimming with something the others had lost long ago: hope. The air itself felt heavy, like the weight of an era closing. Finally, Parker broke the silence. His voice wasn't for Sarah, not entirely. It was for every soldier within earshot. You all saw what happened here today. You saw skill, yes, but skill isn't the point. What you really saw was the cost, the scars, the price paid in silence. And if you learn nothing else from this day, learn this: strength doesn't mean carrying more than you can. It means knowing when enough is enough. His words hung in the air. Soldiers shifted, uncomfortable, thoughtful. Sarah didn't look at him. She didn't need speeches. She needed quiet. She turned toward the crowd. For the first time all day she spoke to them, her voice soft, trembling but clear enough to carry. You all think you want to be legends. You don't. Legends don't sleep. Legends don't laugh. Legends don't live. They exist in shadows, and they disappear when the world decides they're no longer useful. Her eyes swept the bleachers, catching faces young and old. Don't chase shadows, be people, be human. Because when it's over, that's all that matters. Not medals, not stories, just the small dignity of still being yourself. The silence after her words was raw, heavy, true. Vasquez swallowed hard, tears burning her eyes. She nodded, whispering, "Yes, ma'am." though Sarah had never asked for respect. Matthews finally stopped packing. He looked at Parker, then at Sarah. For once, he didn't argue. He just sighed, almost defeated. Then we'll say nothing. We'll bury this again. Sarah's eyes flickered with gratitude, but she said nothing. She'd learned silence was more powerful than thanks. Reynolds bristled, his pride clawing for purchase. You can't just bury it. She humiliated me in front of everyone. She broke protocol, Parker turned on him, his tone cutting sharp. She reminded you what a real soldier looks like. And if you can't handle that, Captain, maybe it's time you reconsider your place here. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reynolds froze. His mouth opened, then closed, his career slipping through his fingers in the eyes of everyone present. He stepped back, silent for the first time in his command. Sarah didn't gloat. She didn't even look at him. She just stood quietly, rifle across her arms, the ghost who'd chosen to stand in daylight one last time. The sun was dipping lower now, shadows stretching across the range. The day was ending, so was something more. Parker leaned close, his voice low so only she could hear. They'll keep coming, they won't stop. But if you need shelter, if you need someone to stand between you and them, you have it. Sarah met his gaze, her own steady despite the tremor in her hands. I don't need shelter, I just need to be left alone. He nodded, respecting it, though he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Vasquez stepped forward, hesitant. What about us, ma'am? Those of us who saw today, who believe. Sarah looked at her, at the young face still unscarred by years of war. Her voice softened. Then remember what I said. Don't chase shadows, carry dignity instead. Her words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They would echo long after she was gone. She slung her rifle, zipped her jacket higher, and walked toward the horizon. No escort, no applause, just the sound of gravel under her boots and silence behind her. No one followed, no one dared. Because they knew. Some stories don't end with medals or headlines. They end with a walk into the setting sun, leaving behind whispers that may outlast the person herself. Sarah Wilson didn't return to Shadow Team that day. She didn't vanish completely either. She became something else. A reminder, a warning, a quiet proof that the strongest people aren't the ones who fight forever. They're the ones who choose when to stop. And in that choice, she left behind the only moral that mattered, not for generals, not for command, not for history. For the soldiers who watched, the ones who would carry her truth in their bones. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.